Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, class. So this is the third chapter of our discussion in biology class, the movement into and out of the cells. And these are our learning objectives. So basically, we are going to discuss about diffusion and then osmosis and active transport. We are going to focus only on these three. Okay, so first, let's take a look on this. This is an analogy to make it easier to imagine the function of cell membrane. Is that just like this security, yeah, we have a building, so we need a gatekeeper, right, to control who can pass through the gate and then who are not allowed. This is also happen in our cell. So the structure that work as the controller for the substance that can go inside or go outside of the cell is the cell membrane. Remember, every cell needs to have three main parts: the cell membrane as the barrier, the cytoplasm, the jelly-like structure, and the nucleus. Okay, we have talked about this in the previous chapter. And let's start with the first subtopic, that is the diffusion. Okay. Diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. This slide, you can use this slide to make it easier for you to compare between these three. Okay, to recall the concept that you have understood about these three, what are the similarities, what are the differences. Okay, so for diffusion, the first thing that we need to remember is that diffusion is a random movement. Okay, so the direction is irregular. It's random, acak, yeah? Okay, the random movement of particles here, particles. If we are talking about movement, we are talking about change in position, right? The position change, the position of the particle change, they move from high to low concentration. What does it mean, high to low concentration? High concentration, it means there are a lot of particles in that region. Okay? Meanwhile, for the low concentration, it only have a few particles. And this process happens naturally and it doesn't need any energy from the respiration. So for diffusion, the particle only rely on the kinetic energy of those particles itself. Talking about the concentration, let's take a look at the previous slide. Oh, sorry, this one. Okay. This image, I hope, can help you to understand the concept of concentration gradient. What does it mean, gradient? I think you have found it in a math topic. Okay, gradient. In Indonesia, we call it as kemiringan. Okay, the gradient. So basically, the gradient of concentration or concentration gradient is the difference, perbedaan, the difference between concentration of two regions. We can imagine the concentration just like this. For example, this is a hill, yeah, a hill. What is hill? Bukit, yeah. So this position and this position representing two regions that have different concentration, different number of particles. Okay. And for the passive transport, the movement of the particle is down the concentration gradient. It means the particle move from the high concentration to the low concentration. And this process is easy and it doesn't need any energy. Meanwhile, for the active transport, the direction is vice versa, sebaliknya. So from this side, okay, going up to this side. If we apply this understanding to the concentration gradient, so the movement will move the particle from the low concentration to the high concentration. So we need to climb, memanjat, the climb concentration gradient. And we have the term here against the concentration gradient. Because it is active, we need the energy from respiration. Okay. Next, still talking about the diffusion. So these are the keyword. Okay, I'll move it here. Random movement of molecules. Random, it is random, okay? From high to low concentration and down a concentration gradient because diffusion is part of passive transport, so it doesn't need any energy. Okay? This image representing process of diffusion across the cell membrane. Okay? And as you can see, this is actually the zoom in version of this part. Okay, so this is the cell membrane. This is the cell membrane. We have the head part and then the tail. Yeah, and this molecule, the blue hexagons here, representing a particle that diffuse across the cell membrane. Okay, and here, the more particle, it means it has the higher concentration. So if this side having higher concentration of the particle and this side, the inside of the cell, it has lower concentration of particle. So the diffusion will be in this direction. From the outside, go to inside of the cell. How can I decide whether this is outside, this is inside? This is the key. Extracellular fluid. Extra. Berarti dia di luar, ya, outside of the cell. Meanwhile, for this side, because we have the cytoplasm here, cytoplasm, of course, it is located inside of the cell, right? Okay, so this is the outside. Meanwhile, this one is the inside of the cell. Because the outside is higher concentration, more particle present, so these particles will move, will diffuse into the cell. Okay? Let's continue. What things that can diffuse across the cell membrane? So we need to remember that the function of cell membrane is to control what substance, what thing that can go in, what thing that can go out, right? This characteristic of cell membrane is called as selective permeable or semi-permeable. This is the same thing. This is the characteristic of cell membrane, which means that the membrane only allows some molecules but block other molecules. So not all are allowed, yeah, because this is selective. Only the selected molecule that can pass through the cell membrane. Okay. Now here, this picture representing about how this example of molecule can diffuse or cannot. Let's start with the first one. This arrow represent how fast is the diffusion can happen. Okay, the first thing, here we have the biggest arrow, yeah, and what thing that can pass through the cell membrane by this big arrow? We have this. These are the requirements. The small and hydrophobic molecule. Small, talking about the size. Okay, usually gas, the size of gas molecule is really small usually. And how about hydrophobic? Hydro means water. Yeah, water. Phobic, phobia, afraid of something. Phobia of dark, phobia of hate, ketakutan. So it means Hydrophobic means afraid of water. Okay, afraid of water. The molecule, afraid of water. We need to know that this cell membrane, this part of the cell membrane, the tail of the cell membrane, made of lipid. What is lipid? Lemak or fat. You know, lipid or fat, do they are they a friend of water? No, right? Mereka kan nggak bisa menyatu ya kalau sama air ya. That's why only those molecules that afraid of water that can pass through easily. Okay, the example are these, the drugs. The drugs is usually designed as hydrophobic molecule. Meanwhile, for the oxygen and carbon dioxide, these are small molecule of gases. So they can pass through the cell membrane very easily and quickly. Next, we have still the small molecule, but it is hydrophilic. Hydro means water. Philic, feel. They have feeling for water. They friend of water. Yeah, just like the opposite of afraid of. Yeah, let's say mereka suka sama air. Even though these molecules are friend of water, but because the size are small, so they can still pass through the cell membrane. But pay attention to the arrow here is much smaller than this one, right? It means, yes, they can still pass the cell membrane, but the speed or the rate of the diffusion is much slower than the first one. Okay. Third, the large and charge. Large, we are talking about the the size of molecule, because this is too large, they cannot pass through the cell membrane. For example, the glucose, the ATP. You should remember about the ATP. This is the molecule that store energy, and this is produced from the process of respiration. Next, we have the charge. We are talking about ions. Okay, ions. Charge means here bermuatan, yeah. So if we have any ions, for example, K plus, Na plus, Cl minus, and then Ca2 plus, pokoknya kalau ada muatannya, ions, they cannot pass through the cell membrane. For example, sodium, this is ion, yeah. Next, very large. Of course, if the large molecule cannot pass through, even is only large, ya, apalagi very large, ya. Of course, they cannot pass through the cell membrane by having diffusion. Okay. Okay. So, what is the function of diffusion in cell? In the beginning of our live meeting, we did the demonstration of me spraying the perfume, and then you can smell the fragrance, right? That's the diffusion in our daily life. That is obvious. I mean, we can observe it. But how about the diffusion in cell? We cannot observe it directly, but it is happening. Yeah, it is happening in our body. The first thing, get many of cell necessities. Necessities mean kebutuhan. Yeah, it can be anything. It can be water, it can be oxygen, yeah, it can be drugs that previously we have mentioned. Drugs is part of the hydrophobic molecules. Yeah, so to get the substance to go inside the cell, we need to do the cell need to have the diffusion of those substances. Okay, the second one, carry out gas exchange for respiration. Gas exchange, pertukaran gas. This is what happen inside of our lungs. Okay, so between the oxygen and the carbon dioxide, the oxygen will move from the alveolus, the oxygen, oh, sorry, move from the alveolus, yeah, to the red blood cell. If we have this kind of condition, it means the alveolus should contain more concentration of oxygen, right? Because remember, diffusion always start with the high concentration and those particles will move into the lower concentration, okay? Meanwhile, for the carbon dioxide, we need to remove the carbon dioxide from our body, right? So for the carbon dioxide, will be the opposite. It will move from the red blood cell to the alveolus. The alveolus is part of our lungs. And if the gas already in alveolus, the carbon dioxide is already in alveolus, it is ready to be removed, to be exhaled, dihembuskan keluar. Ya, so the oxygen concentration of oxygen in alveolus need to be higher than the red blood cell. Meanwhile, for the carbon dioxide in the red blood cell need to be higher than in the alveolus. Okay. Next, here we have the get rid of many of their waste product. So not only to take the important, the important necessities, but the cell also need to get rid of the waste. Selain ngambil bahan, juga perlu buang sampah. Now, for example, the carbon dioxide, the one that we have talked before. So this is the example for the third point. Okay, these are, we already discussed about the animal cells. Meanwhile, for this is the example for plants. Okay, still about the oxygen and carbon dioxide, but the position, they don't have lungs, they don't have alveolus, so the exchange, the diffusion of the gas happen in the leaf cell, okay, where the oxygen is produced from process of photosynthesis. So inside of the leaf, inside of the leaf cell, the concentration of oxygen is higher than the outside. That's why the oxygen can diffuse out. Meanwhile, for the carbon dioxide, in the environment, they contain higher concentration of carbon dioxide. That's why it can diffuse into the leaf cell. And this carbon dioxide will be used as the materials for doing the photosynthesis. Okay. These are the other example of function of diffusion in cells. So you can take a look on this. In the previous one is only a view, but here there are more. Basically, it's the same concept. Yeah, we can apply the same concept. So as long as you understand how is the movement of the particle in diffusion, remember always from the high concentration to the low concentration. Okay, so this is the site where the diffusion happen. For example, the small intestine, usus halus. Okay, the small intestine is used or functioned as the place for absorbing the nutrients. Okay, so for example, here the molecules that move are the molecules of digested food, makanan yang sudah dicerna. Okay, for example, glucose, amino acid, fatty acid, and glycerol, etc., etc. And the movement, lumen of small intestine, this is where the concentration is higher, and then to kemana, gitu kan? Nah, this is the lower concentration. Okay, for this one we already discussed it. For this one we already discussed it. Leaf, water vapor, uap air. Yeah, this is through the stomatal pores. This is the outside of the stomata. Because in the stomatal pores, it contain more water vapor. Be careful with this one. It needs to be water vapor, not only water. Because for water, we have the special term after this. Okay, the stomatal pore contain more water vapor. So the diffusion can happen from this side into this side. Meanwhile, for the lungs here, 1 and 2, we already discussed it previously. Okay, this is the basic concept or the principle of diffusion, yeah, that we have discussed. Ini semuanya sudah tadi. Okay, now the factors that affect the diffusion. What are the factors that affect the diffusion? Here there are 3 factors. The first one is concentration gradient. Just remember what is concentration gradient? The difference between concentration in 2 regions, right? The greater the difference in concentration, the quicker the rate of diffusion. Imagine that we are talking about the hill, the hill in the previous image. If what is it? The difference is like this, yeah. The movement, for example, let's say like this. For example, like this, yeah. This point and this point. If we compare to this one, right, lebih jauh ya, atas sama bawahnya, lebih curam. Nah, of course, this one, the movement from this side to this side it will be faster rather than if I have like this, from this to this. Selisih tingginya itu loh, ya. Okay, so berbanding lurus. Kalau concentration gradientnya greater, ya berarti rate of diffusionnya juga quicker. Next, the temperature. This is related to the kinetic energy of the particle. Remember, in diffusion, we only, not us, yeah. The particle only rely on their own kinetic energy. And the higher temperature, the more kinetic energy the particle will have. It means they have more energy, they will move quicker, they will move faster. Okay. The next one, the surface area of the cell membrane separating the different regions. The greater the surface area, the faster the rate of diffusion. The surface area is the site of for the particles to be in contact. Ya, berarti kalau misalnya luas permukaannya banyak, the place or the site for diffusion to happen, of course, it will increase. It means the rate of diffusion also increase. Yeah. Okay. Actually, there is one more, the distance. The distance. Yeah. For the distance, the further the distance is, the slower the rate of diffusion can happen. Kalau jaraknya semakin jauh, berarti apa? Semakin lambat, ya kan? For example, in our demonstration, the students at the back side of the class will smell last, ya terakhir ya kan, normally. Tapi ya nggak tahu kalau misalnya di tengah-tengah dia lebih cepat gitu, terus yang di depan misalnya lagi pilek, ya of course it is affected by another factors gitu ya. But basically, the further the distance, the slower the rate of the diffusion. Okay, this is the end for diffusion. After this, in the second part, we are going to talk about the osmosis. So stay tuned. Okay, I will stop the recording here. See you in the next recording.